Pope's Glen Bushland Reserve nestles on the edge of the Blue Mountains National Park, near the township of Blackheath, New South Wales. This is the story of how a weed-infested wasteland was transformed into a thriving wetland. Pope's Glen Creek is a permanent stream that rises in Soldiers Memorial Park beside the Blackheath Pool. It flows through the Blackheath Caravan Park and into the newly created Pope's Glen Wetland, a thriving community of wetland and riparian plants and home to large numbers of birds and frogs. Only a few kilometres downstream, the creek flows into the Blue Mountains National Park and World Heritage Area and tumbles over the escarpment into the spectacular Gross Valley. From here, it joins the Gross River and eventually becomes part of the Hawkesbury-Nepean River system. This means the health of this small urban stream and surrounding bushland has important consequences. Due to the town's topography, much of the runoff from the surrounding residential area ends up in Pope's Glen Creek. Hard surfaces cause dramatic spikes in flow during rain, carrying debris and silt into the creek. Pope's Glen wetland hasn't always looked like this. Thanks to 16 years of work by the volunteers of the Pope's Glen Bush Care Group, with practical support from Blue Mountains City Council and funding from the State Government of New South Wales, the former wasteland has been transformed. The valley used to be a forest of enormous willows with a dense understory of other weeds like privet, blackberry and ivy. Over many years, rain had carried large quantities of silt from roadways which were not surfaced until 1996. This resulted in a large silt flat that became a home for the weeds. The group began poisoning the willows a few at a time to prevent the erosion of the silt flat. This dead willow, labelled 6A, is being felled, and here are the stumps 10 years later, surrounded by flowering leptospermum. From above, the felled willows look like dead spiders. Their limbs were left on site for later use to help create the wetland, as we're about to see. At the same time as the willows and other weeds were being progressively removed, volunteers worked to plant thousands of seedlings grown up from seeds collected on site. These plants were chosen for their ability to survive in this hostile environment, the plastic guards protecting them from environmental extremes including wallabies, snow and sun. Today, many of these plantings have grown to be indistinguishable from native bush. Across the silt flat, native wetland species such as Garnia, Carex and Juncus are thriving. Overlooking the valley floor, the understory now includes a healthy mix of Hakea, Bauera, Acacia and tea tree species, plus many more. Pope's Glen Creek used to be a single stream, cutting a channel through the valley. In order to reduce erosion of the creek banks and to provide water for the new plantings, the volunteer group undertook several strategies to disperse the flow across the silt flat. After several failed efforts by the volunteers themselves, contractors were engaged to create a weir across the creek, including a diversion channel to split the flow. During storm events, stormwater carries silt from roadways into a newly created sedimentation pond where it can be removed. This pond overflows across the wetland, supporting the vegetation and visiting ducks. To help spread the overflow, dispersion cells were built. Gumboots are now obligatory for all site workers. Logs and branches from the dead willows were also put to good use. These barely visible stakes show how quickly the wetland vegetation regenerates. The whole group got engaged in this soft engineering work, and again the site recovered quickly. The local herons are happy, if not the yabbies. To deal with potential channeling and erosion from stormwater, the group invented ripple beds by piling up smaller sticks. During heavy rain, water now flows evenly across the wetland, flattening the vegetation, which protects the surface of the silt flat from erosion. Where the silt flat ends, a vulnerable cliff needed to be stabilised. This was done by a team of contractors who began with 20 tonnes of rocks to build a causeway. What we see today is nicknamed the Ark, but before it was hidden under rehabilitated vegetation, it looked like this: an enormous structure designed to protect the silt cliff, built out of railway sleepers that were carried in by hand. During heavy rain, the causeway and the Ark create a waterfall while still stabilising the silt wall behind. The overflow from the Ark rejoins the creek. To manage the excess waste from the felled willows, the volunteers piled the debris into stacks for gradual decomposition on site. These became part of the landscape and proved to be important habitat for small birds returning to the wetland. To support the bird population after the debris piles compost down, the group embarked on a program of dense thicket planting. During community planting days, about 1,000 seedlings were planted in 3 locations. These plantings quickly grew into dense thickets like this one, and are regularly visited by many species. Other fauna enjoying the wetland include frogs. The striped marsh frog is a regular resident of the sedimentation pond, while this emerald-spotted tree frog calls from nearby habitats. Dragonflies and mayflies are indicators of the health of the wetland. Without the group's carefully recorded photo history, it would be hard to remember the highly degraded wasteland that the Pope's Glen Bush Care Group has transformed. The success of this ambitious rehabilitation project is celebrated on these 3 interpretive signs erected at the headwaters of Pope's Glen Creek.